The billionaire paid her $89,000 debt for a baby, but after taking her virginity, he fell in love and said, "You're mine now." Hi family, I'm your host, Dr. Tom. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Also, if you enjoy today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The eviction notice trembled in Layla Cordova's hands like a death sentence written on crisp white paper. 22 years old, standing in the cramped Miami apartment that had been home for the past 6 years, she felt the weight of failure crushing down on her shoulders. The Florida heat made everything sticky and suffocating, but this piece of paper felt like ice against her fingertips. 30 days, she whispered to the empty living room, her voice echoing off walls that had witnessed too many sleepless nights, too many tears, too many impossible decisions. The furniture around her told the story of their struggle. A second-hand couch with faded cushions, a coffee table held together with wood glue, and scattered across every surface, the endless mountain of medical bills that had become her daily nightmare. Diego's surgery had saved his life, but it had destroyed theirs financially. $89,000 in medical debt from the experimental procedure that gave her 16-year-old brother a future, but stole away their present. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had fought so hard to keep Diego alive, only to fail at keeping them housed. She walked to his bedroom door, pushing it open just enough to see him sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of health she had prayed for during those terrifying months when they didn't know if he would survive. The scar from his surgery was barely visible now, hidden beneath his favorite Lakers jersey, but the financial scar it left on their family would take years to heal, if they could even survive that long. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Another shift notification from the luxury yacht Marina, where she spent her mornings scrubbing million-dollar toys for Miami's elite. The bitter irony of her situation hit her daily cleaning boats worth more than most people's houses, while counting quarters for gas money, polishing chrome fixtures that cost more than her monthly rent, while her own home was about to be taken away. Layla had become a master of survival, juggling 3 jobs with the precision of a circus performer. Mornings at the Marina, afternoons at Bistro Valencia downtown, and weekends catering events for people who spent more on wine than she made in a month. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford, meals a necessity she often skipped, and her own dreams a fantasy she had buried beneath the crushing reality of responsibility. The restaurant job barely covered their basic expenses: rent, utilities, groceries bought with careful calculation and endless coupons. The catering work helped with Diego's medications and therapy sessions. But the Marina job, that was her favorite despite the early hours and physical demands. There was something peaceful about working near the water, something honest about the work itself, and something satisfying about making those beautiful vessels shine. She had always been drawn to the ocean, had dreamed once of becoming a marine biologist, of studying the creatures that lived beneath the waves, of contributing something meaningful to the world's understanding of marine life. But those dreams belonged to a different version of herself. One who had parents to support her education, one who didn't have to choose between her own future and her brother's life. The owner of the Marina, Mr. Patterson, had been kind to her, never complaining when exhaustion made her slower than usual, never questioning why she sometimes came to work with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent calculating impossible mathematics, how to stretch $50 into $100, how to make time move slower so she could fit more work into each day. But today had been different. Today her body had finally rebelled against the impossible demands she placed on it. She remembered the moment clearly. She had been polishing the railings on one of the larger yachts, a stunning vessel with gleaming white hull and brass fittings that caught the morning sun like jewelry. The boat belonged to some businessman, she had been told. Someone important who kept his vessel in pristine condition and expected the same level of care she would give to a priceless work of art. The heat had been unbearable, the humidity making her clothes stick to her skin, but she had pushed through it like she always did. Then suddenly the world had started spinning, the horizon tilting at impossible angles, and she felt herself falling forward, her vision going dark around the edges as she fell. Meanwhile, 50 miles north of the Marina, in a glass tower that kissed the Miami skyline, Nolan Beckham stood at floor-to-ceiling windows watching storm clouds gather over Biscayne Bay. At 36, he controlled an empire that his father could never have dreamed of when he started with a small boat repair shop in the Marina district. Beckham Maritime Industries was worth $4.8 billion, a shipping and logistics powerhouse that moved cargo across every major shipping route in the world. Nolan had built it from the ground up, transforming his father's failing business into a global force through sheer determination, strategic thinking, and an almost supernatural ability to see opportunities where others saw only problems. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he faced a problem that money alone couldn't solve, a challenge that threatened everything he had worked to build. His board of directors, the 12 men and women who helped guide the company's major decisions, had delivered an ultimatum disguised as friendly advice. Succession planning could no longer be delayed. Without clear succession, we're vulnerable, board member Victoria Walsh had said that morning, her tone professional but her message unmistakable. There are larger corporations circling us like sharks, waiting for any sign of weakness. A hostile takeover isn't just possible, it's probable, unless we can demonstrate long-term stability through family succession. The words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. He had dedicated his life to building this company, sacrificing personal relationships, social connections, even basic human intimacy for the sake of growth and success. He worked 16-hour days, traveled constantly, lived and breathed maritime logistics with an intensity that left no room for traditional family building. Now, at 36, he found himself in the peculiar position of needing something that couldn't be acquired through negotiation or purchased with capital: a wife and child. The board wasn't demanding marriage explicitly, but their message was clear: demonstrate family stability and succession planning, or risk losing everything to corporate predators who saw dollar signs where he saw legacy. His assistant knocked on the office door, interrupting his brooding contemplation of the storm clouds outside. "Sir, there's been an incident at the marina. One of our contracted cleaning staff collapsed during her shift." Nolan barely listened initially, his mind still consumed with succession planning and board pressures. Marina incidents were routine: heat exhaustion, minor injuries, equipment problems. His facilities manager usually handled such matters without involving him directly. "She's been hospitalized for dehydration and exhaustion," his assistant continued. "Apparently she's been working multiple jobs to pay for her brother's medical bills. The paramedics said she collapsed while cleaning one of the premium vessels." Something about the story caught Nolan's attention. He turned from the window, his business instincts suddenly engaged. Here was a young woman in desperate financial straits, willing to work herself into collapse for her family's sake. Someone who needed something he could provide easily: money, security, medical care for her brother. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could give him exactly what he needed without the complications of traditional courtship, romantic expectations, or emotional entanglements that would interfere with his business focus. The idea formed in his mind with the clarity of a business strategy, cold and logical but potentially beneficial for everyone involved. He wasn't looking for love, he was looking for a solution. And sometimes the most elegant solutions came from the most unexpected places. "Which hospital?" he asked, already reaching for his jacket. "Jackson Memorial," his assistant replied, still looking confused by his sudden interest in what seemed like a routine workplace incident. "Prepare my car," Nolan said, "and find out everything you can about this woman. Her full name, her situation, her family circumstances. I want a complete report by the time I reach the hospital." 2 hours later, Layla slowly opened her eyes to the steady beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell that reminded her too much of Diego's countless procedures. Her head felt heavy, her mouth dry as cotton, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. A figure sat in the chair beside her hospital bed, tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her annual income. He looked up from his phone when he noticed her stirring, and his gray eyes held a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't identify. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "I'm Nolan Beckham." Layla tried to sit up, wincing at the IV in her arm and the dull ache in her head. She knew that name. Everyone at the marina knew who owned the fleet of luxury vessels they maintained. "I know who you are. Your boats are the only ones I actually enjoy cleaning. You keep them in better condition than most people keep their cars." He smiled, a real smile, not the polished version she'd seen in business magazines. "The nurses said you collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. When's the last time you ate a proper meal? When's the last time you slept 8 hours?" The questions hit her like a physical blow. Not because they were harsh, but because they were asked with genuine concern. "I don't remember," she admitted, the honest answer slipping out before she could stop it. "Your brother's surgery," Nolan said gently, leaning forward in his chair. "The staff mentioned you're working multiple jobs to pay for it. How much do you owe? Layla's defenses went up immediately, even in her weakened state. I don't need charity, Mr. Beckham. I can handle my own problems. I'm not offering charity, he said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike, more calculated. I'm offering a business proposition. Something in his voice made her look at him. Really look. His gray eyes held an intensity that suggested this wasn't casual small talk or polite concern from a wealthy boat owner checking on an injured employee. What kind of business proposition? She asked cautiously, her instincts telling her this conversation was about to take a turn she couldn't possibly anticipate. Nolan stood, walking to the window before turning back to face her. When he spoke, his words were measured, deliberate, like a CEO presenting a merger proposal to a board of directors. I need something that money can't typically buy, he said. And you need something that money can solve. Perhaps we can help each other. I don't understand. I need an heir, he said simply, as if discussing a shipping contract or quarterly projections. My company requires succession planning, and I don't have time for traditional courtship. You need financial security for your family. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Layla felt her heart hammering against her ribs, certain she had misunderstood, or that the medications were making her hallucinate. You want me to have your baby? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to marry me, he said, his tone remaining steady and professional. Real marriage, legal commitment. I'll pay off every medical bill, ensure your brother gets the best ongoing care, provide you both with a secure future. In return, you give me a child and help me save my company. Layla stared at him, certain she'd heard wrong. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder, matching the rapid pace of her pulse. You don't even know me. I know you work 3 jobs to pay for your brother's medical care, he said, counting off on his fingers like listing qualifications for a position. I know you collapsed rather than ask for help. I know you take pride in your work. My boats have never looked better, and I know you're strong enough to handle whatever life throws at you. This is insane, she breathed, her mind reeling from the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Completely, he agreed without hesitation. But sometimes insane is the only solution that makes sense. You're drowning in debt that will take you years to pay off, assuming you can keep working at your current pace without killing yourself. Your brother needs ongoing medical care that you can't afford. I need a wife and child to secure my company's future. We can solve each other's problems. Layla's mind raced through the implications, the sheer audacity of his proposal, the cold calculation behind it. You're talking about marriage, about bringing a child into the world. This isn't a business contract. It can be, he said quietly. Marriage contracts have existed for centuries, arrangements that benefit both parties. I'm not asking you to love me, Layla. I'm asking you to consider a partnership that could change both our lives. She looked at him, this strange, intense man who had appeared in her hospital room like some kind of fairy tale figure, offering to solve all her problems with conditions that seemed impossible to accept. What if I say no? Then you say no, he replied simply. You go back to working 3 jobs, fighting a debt you'll never overcome, watching your brother worry about the financial burden his health has placed on your family. And I go back to finding another solution to my succession problem. The silence stretched between them, filled with the steady beeping of machines and the weight of an impossible decision. Layla closed her eyes, thinking of Diego sleeping peacefully in their apartment, unaware that his sister was being offered a chance to secure his future forever. How long do I have to decide? She asked, opening her eyes to find Nolan watching her with an expression that might have been respect. Take all the time you need, he said, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket and placing it on the bedside table. But Layla, understand this. I'm not playing games. This is a serious offer with serious benefits and serious commitments. If you agree, I'll expect you to honor the arrangement completely. As he walked toward the door, Layla called out to him. Why me? You could have anyone. Nolan paused, his hand on the door handle. Because anyone else would expect love, romance, emotional complications that I don't have time for. You understand the value of practical solutions to desperate problems. And because, he added, turning to look at her one last time, you're the only person I've ever met who collapsed from exhaustion while making my boats shine like they were precious jewels. That kind of dedication is exactly what I need. He left her alone with his impossible proposition, staring at the business card that might hold the key to saving everything she cared about, at a price she wasn't sure she could pay. Tell me in the comments, Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your pride and protecting someone you love? Share your heart with us. 3 days later, Layla stood in the marble-floored lobby of Beckham Maritime Industries, clutching Diego's hand as they waited for the elevator that would take them to the 52nd floor. Her brother kept staring at everything with wide eyes: the crystal chandeliers, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, the receptionist who probably earned more in a month than Layla made in 3. "Are you sure about this?" Diego whispered, his voice small in the vast space. At 16, he was old enough to understand that his sister was about to make an enormous sacrifice for his sake, and the guilt was written all over his face. "I'm sure," Layla lied, squeezing his hand. The truth was, she hadn't slept in 3 days, hadn't been able to eat more than a few bites of anything, and felt like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff with her eyes closed. But the alternative was watching Diego suffer, watching him blame himself for their financial ruin, watching him give up his dreams because his medical bills had destroyed their future. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Nolan stepped out, looking every inch the billionaire in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. But when he saw Diego, his expression softened, and Layla caught a glimpse of genuine warmth beneath his business facade. "You must be Diego," Nolan said, extending his hand to her brother with the same respect he would show a business partner. "I've heard a lot about you." Diego shook his hand, trying to hide his nervousness. "Thank you for helping us, Mr. Beckham. I know what my sister is doing for me." "What she's doing is making a decision that benefits both of us," Nolan replied firmly, and Layla was grateful for the way he removed the burden of guilt from Diego's shoulders. "And I want you to know that your health and education will always be my priority. You're not a burden, Diego. You're family now." The word family hit Layla like a physical blow. She hadn't expected kindness, hadn't prepared for the possibility that this cold business arrangement might contain genuine care for her brother's well-being. In Nolan's office, the marriage contract was spread across his mahogany desk like a roadmap to an unknown destination. The terms were straightforward but comprehensive. Marriage within 48 hours, cohabitation until pregnancy occurred, all debts cleared immediately, a trust fund for Diego's future care and education, and a generous monthly allowance for Layla's personal expenses. "There's a prenuptial agreement as well," Nolan's lawyer explained, a kind-faced woman named Janet who spoke with professional warmth. "It protects both parties' interests, but ensures Layla's financial security, regardless of how the marriage develops over time." Layla read through the documents with shaking hands, each clause representing a piece of her life being restructured, redefined, commodified. But buried within the legal language, she found unexpected protections, clauses that ensured her right to pursue education, provisions for her personal autonomy, guarantees that Diego would be cared for, even if something happened to her. "There's one more thing," she said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment as she looked up from the papers. I don't have experience with men. I've been too busy taking care of Diego to date." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Nolan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "We'll figure it out together," he said quietly. "There's no rush, no pressure. This may have started as a business arrangement, but I want you to feel safe and respected." With Diego as their witness, Layla signed her name with a hand that trembled only slightly. Each signature felt like stepping further from her old life and deeper into a world she didn't understand. The wedding took place 2 days later, in Nolan's private study, a room lined with leather-bound books and nautical artifacts that spoke of generations of maritime tradition. Judge Patricia Romano, a family friend of Nolan's, performed the brief ceremony with dignity and warmth that made the moment feel less like a business transaction and more like an actual beginning. Layla wore a simple ivory dress that Nolan had somehow had delivered in her exact size, along with shoes that fit perfectly and a delicate pearl necklace that had belonged to his grandmother. When she asked how he had known her measurements, he smiled and said, "Lucky guess," but the slight flush in his cheeks suggested he had been more observant during their hospital meeting than she had realized. Diego stood beside them, looking handsome in a new suit that Nolan had insisted on providing, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Layla felt the weight of her new reality settling around her like an expensive coat. Beautiful, but not quite fitting yet. Their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle, tentative, a brief brush of lips that sent an unexpected warmth through Layla's chest. When she looked into Nolan's eyes afterward, she saw something that hadn't been there during their business negotiations: genuine affection, and perhaps the beginning of something deeper. Moving into Nolan's penthouse felt like stepping into a different world entirely. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Miami's coastline, but it felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Everything was perfectly arranged, spotlessly clean, and utterly lacking in personal touches that might reveal who Nolan actually was beneath his business persona. "This is your space now, too," he said, showing her to a master suite that was larger than her entire previous apartment. "Change anything you want, decorate however makes you comfortable. I want you to feel at home here." But Layla felt anything but comfortable in the vast bedroom with its king-sized bed and marble bathroom. She felt small, displaced, like an imposter playing a role she didn't understand. The clothes in her new walk-in closet, beautiful dresses, designer shoes, casual wear in exactly her style and size, only emphasized how carefully Nolan had planned this arrangement. The first week of living together was a careful dance of politeness and boundaries. Nolan left early for work and returned late, giving Layla time to adjust to her new surroundings. They ate dinner together each evening. Formal affairs in his elegant dining room, where they made polite conversation about safe topics, her brother's adjustment to his new private school, Nolan's latest business ventures, the weather. But gradually, small moments began to reveal the man behind the businessman. Layla noticed how Nolan always asked about Diego's day with genuine interest, how he remembered details about her brother's favorite subjects and hobbies. She saw how he treated his housekeeper, Rosa, with respect and kindness, asking about her grandchildren and ensuring she never felt like hired help. When Rosa mentioned that her daughter was struggling with college tuition, Nolan quietly arranged a scholarship without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. "You're not what I expected," Layla said one evening as they walked along the private beach behind his house. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her why she had always loved the ocean. "What did you expect?" Nolan asked, genuinely curious. "Someone colder, more calculating, someone who would treat me like a business acquisition." "Maybe I am calculating," he said with a slight smile. "I calculated that treating you well would be more beneficial than treating you poorly." But Layla had begun to see through his carefully maintained facade. She noticed how he donated anonymously to children's hospitals, how he quietly funded marine biology research programs, how he had created jobs for families struggling in the Marina district where his father's business had started. This wasn't calculation. This was a man who had never learned how to express kindness without disguising it as strategy. 3 weeks into their marriage, Layla made her first real discovery about her husband's inner life. She had been exploring the house, trying to make some corner of it feel like home, when she found his personal study, a smaller, more intimate space than his formal office. The walls were covered with photographs of marine life, scientific journals about ocean conservation, and architectural plans for what appeared to be a marine research facility. "You're interested in marine biology too," she said when he found her there later that evening. Nolan looked almost embarrassed, like a child caught with a secret hobby. "It's nothing serious, just reading I do in my spare time." "These aren't casual magazines," Layla said, running her finger along the spine of a thick textbook on marine ecosystems. "This is graduate-level research, and these plans, a research center I've been thinking about funding," he admitted reluctantly. "Something that could provide real opportunities for students who can't afford traditional programs." Layla felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with recognizing a kindred spirit. "You could go back to school," he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised her. "There's no reason to give up on what you wanted." "The arrangement was for a baby, not an education," she replied, but her heart jumped at the possibility. "The arrangement," he said, stepping closer, "was the beginning, not the entirety of what this could be." That night, for the first time since their wedding, they lingered over dinner, talking about marine conservation, ocean ecosystems, and the dreams they had both set aside for more practical concerns. Layla found herself laughing at Nolan's dry humor, sharing stories about her childhood fascination with sea creatures, and discovering that beneath his business exterior was a man who understood her passion for the natural world. As the weeks passed, the careful boundaries they had maintained began to blur. Layla caught Nolan watching her read, his expression soft and contemplative. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the way his face lit up when she shared something she had learned or thought about during the day. When he worked late in his home office, she would bring him coffee without being asked, and he would thank her with a smile that seemed to reach his eyes. The physical awareness between them grew slowly, like tide gradually covering sand. Accidental touches when they passed each other in the kitchen lingered longer than necessary. Their goodnight kisses, initially brief and formal, became softer, more meaningful. Layla would catch herself studying the strong line of Nolan's jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating, the gentle way he spoke to Diego during their weekend outings. For his part, Nolan seemed equally affected. She noticed how his breathing changed when she stood close to him, how his eyes followed her movements around the room, how he found excuses to brush her hand or touch her shoulder when they talked. The careful control he maintained in business seemed to slip when it came to her, replaced by something more genuine and vulnerable. The night everything changed started with a thunderstorm that rolled in from the Atlantic with unusual violence. Layla had always been afraid of lightning, a childhood fear that she had never quite outgrown, and when the power went out, plunging the penthouse into darkness, she found herself seeking comfort in Nolan's presence. She knocked softly on his bedroom door, feeling foolish but unable to shake her anxiety. "I'm scared," she admitted when he opened the door, flashlight in hand. "Come here," he said without hesitation, opening his arms in invitation. She moved into his embrace, feeling safe for the first time in years. His chest was solid and warm beneath her cheek, his arms strong and protective around her shoulders. When the lightning flashed again, illuminating the room in stark white light, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Layla," he said quietly, his voice rough with something that sounded like longing. "I need you to know that what I'm feeling for you has nothing to do with our arrangement." "What are you feeling?" she whispered, her heart racing with more than fear of the storm. "Like I never want this storm to end," he said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek, "because it gave me an excuse to hold you." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the gentle, respectful kiss of their wedding day. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding back too long, and she responded with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt as months of carefully controlled attraction finally found expression. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other as the storm raged outside, both of them realizing that their carefully maintained business arrangement had become something neither of them had planned for, something that felt dangerously close to love. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside Nolan's bedroom, a different kind of electricity filled the air. Their kiss had opened something between them that neither could ignore any longer. Months of careful restraint dissolving in the space between lightning strikes. "Are you sure about this?" Nolan whispered against her lips, his hands gentle on her face. "I don't want you to feel like this is part of our arrangement." "I'm sure," Layla breathed, and for the first time since signing their contract she felt completely certain about something. "This isn't about the arrangement anymore, this is about us." What followed was tender beyond anything Layla could have expected. Nolan was patient with her inexperience, gentle with her nervousness, taking time to ensure she felt cherished rather than simply desired. Every touch was a question, every caress an invitation she could accept or decline. When she finally gave herself to him completely, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, not the fulfillment of a business contract but the expression of feelings that had been growing between them for months. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the storm gradually subside, Layla felt fundamentally changed. Not just physically, but emotionally, like she had finally become the woman she was meant to be. "I never expected this," she whispered against his chest. "Neither did I," Nolan admitted, his fingers threading through her hair. "I thought I had everything planned out, every variable accounted for. But you changed everything." In the morning, Layla woke to find Nolan already up, sitting by the window with coffee and watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold. He had put on pajama pants but remained shirtless, and she took a moment to appreciate the view, not just his physical beauty, but the peaceful expression on his face, the way the morning light softened his usually sharp features. "Good morning, wife," he said when he noticed she was awake, and the word wife sounded different coming from his lips now, less like a title and more like an endearment. "Good morning, husband," she replied, surprised by how natural it felt. Their morning routine developed organically over the following weeks. Nolan would wake early for his workout, but instead of leaving immediately for the office, he began lingering over breakfast with Layla. They would sit on the terrace overlooking the bay, sharing coffee and conversation about everything from marine conservation to Diego's progress in school to their plans for the day. "I've been thinking about what you said," Nolan mentioned one morning, passing her the financial section of the newspaper. about going back to school. The University of Miami has an excellent marine biology program. Layla's heart leaped, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. That's a very expensive program. Money isn't the issue, Nolan said simply. The question is whether it's something you truly want. More than anything, she admitted. But what about our arrangement? I thought you needed me to focus on getting pregnant. Nolan set down his coffee cup and reached for her hand. Layla, I need you to understand something. What we have now, this marriage, this life we're building, it's not just about fulfilling the terms of a contract anymore. I want you to be happy, to pursue your dreams, to become everything you're capable of becoming. That afternoon, Nolan surprised her by taking her to the university campus for an impromptu tour. As they walked through the marine science building, Layla felt like a child in a candy store, her excitement growing with every laboratory they passed, every professor they met, every glimpse of the research facilities. You could start in the fall semester, the admissions counselor told them. With your background and Mr. Beckham's generous donation to our research program, I'm sure we can work out the details. Later, as they drove home, Layla felt overwhelmed by gratitude and something deeper. Why are you doing this for me? Because seeing you happy makes me happy, Nolan said simply. Because I'm falling in love with you, and I want to give you the world. The words hung between them like a gift, precious and fragile. Layla felt tears prick her eyes as she reached for his hand. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. Diego's transformation was equally remarkable. With the constant stress of medical bills removed and access to the best healthcare money could provide, he flourished like a plant finally given proper sunlight. His grades improved dramatically at his new private school, and he began talking about college, about studying engineering, about dreams that had seemed impossible just months earlier. I want to design ships someday, he told them over dinner one evening. Maybe work for your company, Nolan. You can work wherever your talents take you, Nolan replied seriously. But you'll always have a place at Beckham Maritime if you want it. The three of them had become a real family, complete with inside jokes, weekend traditions, and the comfortable rhythms of people who genuinely cared for each other. Nolan taught Diego to sail on weekends, and Layla would watch from the dock as her husband patiently explained wind patterns and navigation to her brother, his natural teaching ability shining through his usual business facade. 6 weeks after their first night together, Layla stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines stared back at her, undeniable proof that their arrangement had succeeded in its original purpose. But instead of the joy she had expected to feel, she was overwhelmed by a complex mixture of emotions, happiness, fear, and a terrible uncertainty about what this meant for the relationship she and Nolan had built. She found him in his home office, bent over shipping manifests and quarterly reports. For a moment she just watched him work, memorizing the way he frowned in concentration, the way his fingers drummed against his desk when he was thinking through a problem. "Nolan," she said softly, and he looked up immediately, his face brightening with the smile he reserved just for her. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words tumbling out before she lost her nerve. She watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of his true reaction. For a moment his expression was unreadable, a return to the controlled businessman she had first met in the hospital. Then something shifted, and she saw surprise, joy, and then something that looked almost like panic. "That's wonderful," he said, but his voice sounded strange, distant. "This is what we wanted." The words hit her like a physical blow. What we wanted, or what you needed for your company. The question hung between them like a sword. Nolan's silence was answer enough. "Right," Layla said quietly, feeling something cold and hard settling in her chest. "Mission accomplished. I guess I should congratulate you on getting exactly what you paid for." "Layla, that's not..." But she was already turning away, leaving him staring at the empty doorway and wondering how he had managed to destroy the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to him, with just a few carelessly chosen words. The silence that followed Layla's departure felt like a vacuum, sucking all the warmth and life from Nolan's office. He sat frozen at his desk, staring at the quarterly reports that had seemed so important just moments ago, now meaningless numbers on meaningless pages. The pregnancy test lay abandoned on his desk, where Layla had dropped it, those 2 pink lines mocking him with their promise of everything he thought he wanted. He had gotten exactly what he had bargained for, a wife, a pregnancy, the heir his board demanded. So why did he feel like he had just lost everything that mattered? Down the hall, Layla stood in their bedroom, Her bedroom, she corrected herself bitterly, throwing clothes into the same battered suitcase she had brought from her old apartment. Her hands shook as she folded the beautiful dresses Nolan had bought her, the designer shoes that had made her feel like she belonged in his world, the delicate jewelry that had seemed like tokens of affection but now felt like payment for services rendered. The pregnancy symptoms that had been easy to ignore suddenly felt overwhelming. Nausea rolled through her stomach in waves. Whether from the hormones or from heartbreak, she couldn't tell. Her emotions swung wildly between fury and devastation, between the urge to scream at Nolan for reducing their love to a business transaction and the desire to curl up in their bed and pretend this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. His reaction had been crystal clear: relief that the arrangement had worked, satisfaction that his succession problem was solved. The man who had held her through thunderstorms, who had encouraged her dreams, who had made love to her with such tenderness, that man had been an illusion, a performance designed to keep her compliant and cooperative. A soft knock on the bedroom door interrupted her packing. "Layla." Nolan's voice was hesitant, uncertain. "Can we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," she called back, not trusting herself to look at him. "You got what you wanted. Consider our contract fulfilled." "This isn't about the contract anymore, isn't it?" She whirled around to face him, and he took a step back at the pain blazing in her eyes. "You just found out you're going to be a father, and your first reaction was relief that your business problem was solved. Don't try to pretend this was ever about anything else." "You're wrong," he said desperately, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "What we have, what we've built together, what we built was based on a lie," Layla said, zipping her suitcase with violent finality. "I actually started to believe you cared about me. I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be real. But you've reminded me exactly what this is, a transaction. And now that you've gotten your return on investment, I'm done." She pushed past him toward the door, but he caught her arm gently. "Where will you go?" "That's not your concern anymore," she said, shaking off his touch. "I'll find somewhere. I've been taking care of myself and Diego long before you came along." "What about Diego? What about school, his medical care?" "I'll figure it out," she said fiercely, even though the thought terrified her. "I won't let my child grow up thinking love is something you can buy." After she left, the penthouse felt like a mausoleum, beautiful, expensive, and completely lifeless. Nolan wandered through rooms that had finally started to feel like home, touching surfaces that still held traces of Layla's presence. Her coffee cup on the kitchen counter still half full, a marine biology textbook open on the living room table, the throw pillow she had bought because it reminded her of sea foam, the first personal touch she had added to his sterile world. Diego appeared in the doorway, his school uniform wrinkled, his young face etched with disappointment and confusion. "She called me. She's staying with her friend Carmen from the restaurant." "I know you're angry with me," Nolan began, but Diego cut him off. "I'm not angry," the boy said quietly, and somehow that was worse than anger would have been. "I'm just disappointed. I thought you were different. I thought you actually cared about her." "I do care about her." "No, you don't," Diego said with the brutal honesty that only teenagers could deliver. "People who care don't make the people they love feel like business deals. Layla's been hurt enough in her life. She didn't deserve this from you." That night, Nolan sat in his home office, staring at the pregnancy test and trying to understand how he had managed to destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. He had spent so many years protecting himself, building walls around his heart, conducting his life like a series of calculated risks and strategic moves. When Layla had started to breach those walls, when he had begun to feel something real and vulnerable and terrifying, his first instinct had been to retreat back into the safety of business terminology. His phone rang, the board of directors, calling for an emergency meeting. "We heard rumors," Victoria Walsh said without preamble when he answered. "About your marriage, about succession planning. We need to discuss the implications." For the first time in his career, Nolan found himself completely uninterested in board meetings and succession planning. "Not tonight, Victoria. This is exactly what we've been waiting for, Nolan. With an heir on the way, we can finally move forward with the expansion plans, reassure our investors." "I said not tonight," he repeated, hanging up the phone. He had gotten exactly what he thought he wanted, an heir to secure his company, a solution to his board's demands. But the cost had been the woman who had taught him what it meant to love someone more than his own ambitions, more than his own fears, more than his next quarterly profit. Meanwhile, across the city, Layla lay on Carmen's uncomfortable pull-out couch, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, trying to process the magnitude of what her life had become. She was pregnant with the child of a man she had fallen deeply in love with, a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. She had no job, no home, and a brother whose future had been thrown into uncertainty once again. Carmen, her friend from the restaurant, had welcomed her without questions, but Layla could see the worry in her eyes. "You can stay as long as you need," Carmen assured her, but they both knew this wasn't a long-term solution. "I need to find work," Layla said, already mentally calculating how quickly she could get back on her feet. "Maybe I can get my old job back at the marina." "What about the baby?" Carmen asked gently. "You'll need medical care, prenatal vitamins, someone to help you through this." The thought of raising a child alone, of going through pregnancy without Nolan's support, was terrifying. But the alternative, staying in a marriage based on deception and contracts, felt even worse. 2 days passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Nolan threw himself into work with desperate intensity, attending every meeting, reviewing every contract, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythms of business. But his concentration was shattered. He would find himself staring out windows, searching for Layla's dark hair in crowds, reaching for his phone to call her before remembering she wasn't coming home. His board was thrilled about the pregnancy, already making plans for press releases and succession announcements. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had achieved everything they had demanded, but felt more empty than he had before Layla entered his life. On the third night, unable to sleep, Nolan found himself driving aimlessly through Miami's streets. Without conscious thought, he ended up at the marina where it had all begun, where Layla had worked tirelessly to keep their small family afloat, where she had collapsed from exhaustion, where he had first seen an opportunity that had become so much more than he could have ever expected. He parked near the docks and walked toward the small stretch of beach that bordered the marina. The moon was full, casting silver light across the waves, and he remembered how Layla had once mentioned that she sometimes came here during her breaks, finding peace in the sound of the water against the shore. He was so lost in memories that he almost didn't notice the figure sitting on the sand near the water's edge. His heart stopped when he recognized her silhouette. Layla, alone and motionless, staring out at the endless expanse of water where it had all begun. "I thought I might find you here," he said softly, approaching carefully like she might disappear if he moved too quickly. She didn't turn around. "I needed to think. This place always helped me think. Even when everything was falling apart, I could come here during my breaks and remember that there was something bigger than our problems." Nolan settled beside her on the sand, maintaining a careful distance but close enough to see the tear tracks on her cheeks. The marina stretched behind them, boats bobbing gently in their slips, including the yacht where she had collapsed and changed both their lives forever. "I'm an idiot," he said simply. "Yes, you are. When you told me about the baby, I panicked. Because your succession problem was solved, because I realized I want this baby for all the wrong reasons," he said quietly, and Layla finally turned to look at him. "Not for the company, not for succession planning. I want this baby because it's part of you, and losing you would destroy me." The wind off the ocean lifted her hair, and in the moonlight, she looked ethereal, untouchable. "Nolan, I love you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started falling the moment you told me you enjoyed cleaning my boats because you saw beauty in everything, even work that others considered beneath them. You've changed everything about how I see the world, about what matters, about what I want my life to be." "What if I said I feel the same way?" Layla whispered. "Then I'd ask you to forgive me for being an idiot who doesn't know how to express love without hiding behind business terminology," Nolan said, reaching tentatively for her hand. "And I'd promise to spend every day proving that you and this baby are wanted for all the right reasons." Layla looked down at their joined hands, his strong fingers intertwined with hers. Around them, the marina held the echoes of their beginning, the place where she had worked so hard, where she had fallen, where he had found her, and offered her an impossible solution that had become an impossible love. "I was so scared that I was just a means to an end for you. You're the end," he said fiercely. "You're everything I want, everything I need. Everything I never knew I was looking for. The company, the succession planning, all of it means nothing without you." "Ask me to stay," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Not because of our contract, not because of the baby, but because you love me." "Layla Beckham," he said, bringing her hand to his lips, "will you stay with me because you want to build a real life with the man who loves you more than his next breath?" "Yes," she whispered, falling into his arms. "I choose you, Nolan. I choose us." As they held each other on the moonlit beach where their story had begun, Both of them realized that their impossible arrangement had become the most possible thing in the world, a love worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a future on. The marina around them stood as witness to their beginning, and now to their new beginning, a love that had started with desperation and bloomed into something neither of them had dared to dream possible. The months that followed their reconciliation at the marina were like watching a garden bloom after a long winter. Layla moved back into the penthouse, but this time it truly felt like coming home rather than entering a business arrangement. The walls that had once felt cold and imposing now held warmth, filled with the sounds of laughter, Diego's music practice, and the quiet conversations between two people building a real life together. Nolan's transformation was remarkable to witness. The man who had once hidden behind business terminology and calculated moves now wore his heart openly, especially when it came to Layla's pregnancy. He attended every doctor's appointment, read pregnancy books with the same intensity he once reserved for market reports, and converted one of his spare rooms into a nursery with meticulous care and boundless enthusiasm. "You're nesting worse than I am," Layla teased one afternoon, finding him rearranging the crib for the third time that week. "I want everything to be perfect," he said, stepping back to admire his work. "I want our child to know from the very first moment that they are wanted, loved, and treasured." The vulnerability in his voice made Layla's heart ache with tenderness. She moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his as they looked at the nursery together. Soft yellow walls adorned with marine life murals, a bookshelf already filled with children's books about ocean adventures, and a mobile of colorful sea creatures that Nolan had spent hours assembling. "They will know," she assured him, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek, "because they'll have you as a father." Diego had embraced his role as future uncle with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. The serious, worried boy who had once felt guilty about his medical expenses had blossomed into a confident teenager who helped Layla with her pregnancy cravings, attended her ultrasound appointments, and spent hours talking to her growing belly about everything from soccer to science projects. "I'm going to teach them to sail," Diego declared one evening over dinner, "and about marine biology, and how to stand up for themselves. And that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice." Nolan reached across the table to squeeze the boy's shoulder. "They're lucky to have you as an uncle." True to his word, Nolan had enrolled Layla in the University of Miami's marine biology program. Watching her thrive in her classes, seeing her face light up when she talked about her research projects, brought him a satisfaction that no business deal had ever provided. She attacked her studies with the same determination she had once applied to working 3 jobs, but now her energy was fueled by passion rather than desperation. "I want to focus on marine conservation," she told him one night as they walked along the beach near the marina where they had reconciled, "particularly how pollution affects coral reef ecosystems. Professor Martinez thinks I could get a research grant for a project studying the reefs off the Florida Keys." "Whatever you need," Nolan said immediately. "Equipment, funding, research assistance, whatever it takes. I want to earn it myself," Layla said firmly, and Nolan's admiration for her only grew. "I don't want anyone to think I got opportunities because of who I married." "Then you'll earn it," he said simply. "But I'll be here to support you every step of the way." The changes in Nolan extended beyond his personal life into his professional world as well. His board meetings became more focused on sustainable business practices and employee welfare. He implemented programs for healthcare assistance, educational scholarships, and family support that transformed Beckham Maritime from simply a profitable company into one that genuinely cared for its workforce. "You've changed," Victoria Walsh observed during one board meeting. "Ever since your marriage, you seem different, more grounded." "I have different priorities now," Nolan replied simply. "Success isn't just about profit margins anymore. It's about building something that my family can be proud of." His relationship with his employees deepened as well. He began visiting the marina regularly, not just for business inspections but to check on the workers, to hear their concerns, to remember what it felt like to work with his hands as his father had done. The staff, who had once seen him as a distant figurehead, began to view him as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. As Layla's pregnancy progressed, their love deepened in ways neither had expected. Nolan would spend evenings reading to her growing belly, his deep voice filling their bedroom with stories of ocean adventures and fairy tale romances. He learned to massage her swollen feet, to prepare the specific foods she craved, to wake in the middle of the night when she couldn't sleep and simply hold her until the discomfort passed. I never expected you to be so nurturing, Layla admitted one night as he rubbed her aching back. I never had anyone to nurture before, he replied honestly. You and this baby have awakened parts of me I didn't know existed. The night Layla went into labor, Nolan's carefully controlled composure completely abandoned him. He paced the hospital corridors like a caged animal, gripping Diego's hand for support, alternately praying and promising the universe anything if mother and baby came through safely. When the doctor finally called him into the delivery room, Nolan's legs nearly gave out at the sight of his son, a perfect tiny human being with Layla's dark hair and what appeared to be his own determined chin. He's beautiful, he whispered, tears streaming down his face as the nurse placed the baby in his arms. He's absolutely perfect. Layla, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband hold their son with a gentleness that took her breath away. This was the man she had fallen in love with, not the calculating businessman, but the tender father who looked at his child like he held the entire world in his arms. What should we name him? Nolan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Diego suggested Gabriel, Layla said softly. Gabriel Ocean Beckham. Gabriel for strength, Ocean for the love that brought us together. Gabriel Ocean Beckham, Nolan repeated, testing the name. It's perfect. The first months of parenthood transformed them both in unexpected ways. Nolan, who had once worked 16-hour days, now left the office promptly at 5 to help with evening feedings and bath time. He converted part of his home office into a play area so Gabriel could be near him when he worked from home. Board meetings were rescheduled around his son's nap times, and business trips were planned with military precision to minimize time away from his family. Layla flourished as a mother while continuing to excel in her studies. She wrote her thesis on coral reef restoration while nursing Gabriel, conducted research while he napped in his carrier, and presented her findings to academic conferences with the confidence of someone who had overcome impossible odds to achieve her dreams. Diego, now 18 and preparing for college, had grown into a remarkable young man. His acceptance to MIT's engineering program came with a full scholarship, but more importantly, it came with the security of knowing his family was stable and his future was bright. I want to study naval architecture, he told them over dinner one evening. I want to design ships that don't harm the ocean. Ships that work with the environment instead of against it. Following in the family business, Nolan said with pride, but making it better. 2 years after Gabriel's birth, Nolan surprised Layla with a groundbreaking ceremony for the Cordova Beckham Marine Research Center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to ocean conservation and providing research opportunities for underprivileged students. You didn't have to name it after me, Layla protested, though tears of joy glistened in her eyes. Yes, I did, Nolan said firmly. This center represents everything you've taught me about seeing beauty in the world, about fighting for what matters, about using privilege to lift others up. Your name belongs on it. As they stood together at the groundbreaking, Gabriel toddling between them while Diego operated the ceremonial shovel, Layla reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate young woman cleaning boats to support her brother, to a marine biologist breaking ground on her own research facility, the transformation seemed like something from a fairy tale. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in their circumstances, it was in their hearts. What had begun as a calculated business arrangement had become a love story that neither of them could have scripted, a partnership that made them both better than they had ever been alone. That evening, as they sat on their yacht watching the sunset paint the Miami skyline in shades of gold and pink, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in Layla's arms while Diego practiced his navigation skills with Nolan, Layla felt a profound sense of completion. Do you ever think about how we started? She asked Nolan, leaning against his shoulder. Every day, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. I think about how desperate we both were, how impossible the situation seemed, how neither of us believed we deserved real love. And now I know that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most desperate choices, Nolan said softly. Sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything to find everything you never knew you wanted. As the stars began to appear over the ocean that had brought them together, they sat in comfortable silence, a family built from an impossible beginning, proof that love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances and flourish beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Their story had started with a business proposition and a debt that needed paying. It had become something infinitely more precious, a love that had transformed them all, a family that had been chosen rather than simply born, and a future bright with possibilities that neither desperation nor calculation could have ever created alone. My precious family, as we close this journey together, I want you to know that love finds a way, even in the most impossible circumstances. If this story touched your heart, if it gave you hope, if it reminded you that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, please share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe because your heart deserves more stories like this. You are loved, you are valued, and your story matters. Until next time, my heart is with you.